chemistry of death began with two young boys named Sam and Neil playing together in the woods. But while they were walking farther into the woods, they stumbled upon a dead body of a woman there. That woman was lying dead on the ground with fake angel wings being placed around her. Not long after that, a doctor named David Hunter came to talk to Sam and Neil because their mother, Linda, was worried about them. After Sam and Neil discovered the dead body in the woods, they suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. David asked them about the dead body that they found, and they told him about where they discovered it. Before leaving, David suggested Linda to let her sons take a rest and let time heal their trauma. Linda told him that the dead body of a woman who was found by Sam and Neil in the woods was probably her friend Sally Palmer because she had a bad dream about her last night. Suddenly, some police officers knocked on the door. They came to Linda's house to investigate the dead body that was found by Sam and Neil in the woods. David took them to the place where the dead body was discovered, but he didn't follow them into the woods. Those police officers then searched the woods and found the dead body that was discovered by Sam and Neil there. After that, David went to Sally Palmer's house. It seemed that that house had been abandoned for a long time. David went inside that house, but he couldn't find Sally there. Instead, he saw a mess in that place. He noticed some odd things like the glass that fell from the table and the goats that died because of starvation. He concluded that Sally hadn't returned home for a long time to feed them. David then called a chief inspector named Mackenzie and asked him to investigate Sally's missing case. David admitted that he didn't know Sally very well, and the last time he saw her was in a barbecue party that was held by the community a week ago. After that, David went to see a man named Dr. Henry Maitland and an old woman. He told them about the dead body of a woman that was discovered by Linda's children in the woods. The next day, while studying in the classroom, Neil suddenly collapsed. Neil's teacher, Jenny, called David and asked him to come to the school to help Neil. After David examined Neil, he concluded that Neil was in a good condition and there was not much that he could do. Not long after that, Neil and Sam's father, Jerry, came to that place and picked his children up. When David returned home, he saw Mackenzie waiting for him there. Mackenzie said that he had looked into David's information on internet and found out that David was actually a very talented forensic pathologist. He was confused when he found out about that and asked David why he decided to move to that small village and become a doctor there. He also said that the police had difficulty to identify the dead body that they found in the woods. So he asked David to help them to identify that dead body, but David said that he couldn't do that. In the night, David kept thinking about what Mackenzie asked him earlier. After he thought about it for a while, he finally decided to help Mackenzie to identify that dead body. He called Mackenzie and said that he would help the police to identify the dead body, but he didn't want to see it. The next day, David went to the woods where that dead body was discovered. The police had removed that dead body from that place, so David would only examine the area where that dead body was found. He observed the maggots and insects in that place and concluded that that dead body had been there for around 10 days. After that, he gave Mackenzie something that the police could use to identify that woman's fingerprints. On his way home, David saw Linda walking home and carrying some grocery bags. He stopped his car and offered her a ride. Linda accepted his offer gratefully. In the car, Linda told David about her assumption that Sally was killed because she was investigating something important. After that, David and Dr. Henry visited a man named George in his trailer and examined him. In another place, Jenny met with an autistic boy named Dan Mason by the lake. As a teacher, it was part of her job to talk to her student. Meanwhile, Linda and Jerry were having a fight in their house. To relieve her stress, Linda decided to run every evening. That evening, while she was running in the woods, she stumbled upon a dead body of a bird with leaves and stones being placed around it. She was confused when she saw that. The way that the bird's dead body was placed reminded her of an offering for a ritual. The next day, Mackenzie came to see David and told him that Linda had been gone since yesterday and didn't go to work that day. David said that Linda looked worried and afraid when he saw her another day. After that, Mackenzie went to Jerry's house and asked Jerry about Linda. He found it strange that Jerry wasn't worried about his wife at all. Jerry said that Linda always ran every evening and thought that she probably stayed at her friend's house. He also said that he spent all day at home with his children yesterday. In the evening, Mackenzie led the villagers to search Linda in the woods. But while they were looking for Linda there, some villagers got caught by animal traps that were planted in the woods. The next day, Mackenzie came to see David and asked him to help the police to investigate this case. Turned out, the reason why David refused to see the dead body of the woman that was discovered in the woods was because he was still traumatized by the deaths of his wife and daughter. He still vividly remembered how his wife and daughter died because of drowning back then. But despite that, David finally decided that he would help Mackenzie and the police to investigate the death of that woman. He then went to the mortuary and examined the dead body of the woman that was found in the woods. After he examined it, he concluded that that woman was mutilated with 2 different knives, which were a serrated knife and a hunting knife. He also found out that those knives were used by a right-handed person and a left-handed person. It meant that that woman was murdered by 2 different people. The next day, David returned to the woods after the police informed him that they found another dead body that was buried in that place. David examined the jeans that that corpse was wearing and concluded that that corpse had been buried there for around 4 or 5 years. He also observed the corpse's bone structure and found out that the corpse was biologically a man. So he concluded that that corpse was not Linda. Mackenzie then told him that the dead body of a woman that they found in the woods turned out to be Sally Palmer. In an abandoned house in the woods, Linda was being held captive there. She was alone and scared. There were many dead animals in that place. In another place, a man named Ben Anders was meeting with Dan. Ben was the owner of the bird breeding ground in the village. Dan showed Ben a wounded swan that he found and said that he didn't want to see that swan suffering anymore. So Dan and Ben decided to kill that poor swan to end its suffering. The next day, David and Mackenzie continued to investigate Sally's dead body. David assumed that the person who sewed the wings on Sally's back was a person who used to sew leather. David and Mackenzie also found out that the male corpse that they found in the woods another day was Sally's brother, Alan. David noticed that there were stones that were placed around Alan's dead body, just like how the wings were placed around Sally's dead body. He assumed that Alan and Sally were murdered by the same person. When David returned home, a woman named Tina suddenly approached him and said that she wanted to talk to him. Tina told David that in the night when Linda went missing, Jerry spent a night at her house. It meant that Jerry was lying when he said that he spent all day with his children at home on the day when Linda went missing. Tina admitted that she and Jerry had an affair. She also noticed that there was something strange about Jerry when he saw her that night. Usually, Jerry went to her house on foot, but that night, Jerry visited her in her house by using a car. In the lake, when 2 men were fishing, they suddenly stumbled upon a dead body of a woman that was placed in a giant bird nest. Turned out, that woman was Linda. Tina told Mackenzie that Linda knew about her affair with Jerry and told her friend Sally about it, and it made Jerry mad. Suddenly, Mackenzie received a call from his coworker. His coworker told him that they had discovered Linda's dead body. After Mackenzie received that information, he and David rushed to the location where Linda's dead body was found. David examined Linda's dead body and found out that Linda had been dead for 48 hours, but her dead body had been just moved to that place. After that, Mackenzie and his coworker went to Jerry's house to arrest Jerry. Jerry panicked when he saw them there, so he tried to run away from that place immediately. But the police finally managed to surround and arrest him. Apparently, the deaths of Sally and Linda had been affecting David badly. His mental condition worsened since he saw their dead bodies. Jenny was worried about him. So she went to David's house and asked him to go sailing with her. While Mackenzie was interrogating Jerry, Jerry denied that he was the one who murdered Linda and Sally. But Mackenzie refused to believe him. David and Jenny decided to go sailing in the lake. David was feeling better when he spent some time with Jenny there. It appeared that David and Jenny developed feelings for each other. After spending some time together, Jenny told David that she needed to leave soon because she had a meeting with Dan. Jenny then went to see Dan, who had been waiting for her by the lake. They planned to draw together that day. But suddenly, Jenny accidentally dropped her hat into the lake. While she was trying to retrieve it, she slipped away and fell into the lake. Dan panicked when he saw that and decided to leave that place. After Jenny got her hat back, she went looking for Dan. Dan was worried about her, so he gave her a new shirt so that she could take off her wet shirt and replace it with a clean one. Jenny smiled when she received that shirt, but she was soon surprised when she found out that there was bloodstain in that shirt. Dan told her that he found that shirt in the container. While Jenny was checking that container, someone suddenly closed the door and locked her inside. The next day, Jenny woke up and found herself being tied in an abandoned house. It was the same abandoned house where Linda was being held captive before she died. There were many dead animals in that place. Suddenly, Dan showed up in that place. He told Jenny that someone asked her to go sleep again. Then he approached her and suffocated her until she lost her consciousness. In another place, the police received information that Jenny went missing. They found out that Jenny was last spotted in Ben's bird breeding ground in the woods. As soon as Mackenzie received that information, he sent the SWAT team to that location and ordered them to find Jenny. The SWAT team raided Ben's bird breeding ground, but they didn't find Jenny or Ben there. At the same time, David went to George's trailer to examine George. He knocked on the door and Dan, George's grandson, greeted him. Dan let him in and then left that place. When David went inside that trailer, he was surprised to see George lying dead on the bed. George's dead body was placed in such a way that it looked like he was prepared as an offering for a ritual. David called Mackenzie and told him that Dan was probably the person who had murdered Linda, Sally, and Alan. Before Mackenzie hanged up the call, he informed David that Jenny was reported missing. David was worried when he heard that. He then went to an abandoned building near George's trailer. He went inside that building and found Jenny lying weak there. Suddenly, Dan showed up in that place and attacked David. David was struggling to attack him back, but fortunately, Jenny helped David by stabbing Dan with a knife. Because of that, David finally managed to run away from that place and take Jenny with him. He rushed to the clinic and examined Jenny, who was in critical condition. But while he was trying to help Jenny, Dr. Henry suddenly injected something into his body. David slowly lost his consciousness because of that. 5 years ago, Dr. Henry went to the woods and brutally attacked Alan after he found out that his wife and Alan had an affair. Dr. Henry went berserk and killed Alan in front of his wife. Then, when he was about to bury Alan's dead body, Dan suddenly showed up in that place. Dr. Henry knew that Dan was autistic, so he lied to him by saying that Alan was sick and he was trying to help him to end his suffering. Dan believed him and helped him to bury Alan's dead body. After that, Dr. Henry and his wife left that place. On their way home, Dr. Henry's wife suddenly attacked Dr. Henry and purposely crashed their car into the tree. Because of that car accident, she died instantly. Meanwhile, Dr. Henry managed to survive, but he had to suffer from paralysis. Back to the present time, David finally woke up from his faint and saw Dr. Henry in that place. Dr. Henry threatened that he would inject something into Jenny's body that would kill her if David called the police and told them to come to that place. David said that he knew that Dr. Henry was the one who killed Alan because Dr. Henry's wife and Alan had an affair. He also knew that Dr. Henry suffered from paralysis because of a car accident that happened after he killed Alan. Dr. Henry was angry when he heard that. Suddenly, David attacked him, but Dr. Henry attacked him back. Fortunately, the police managed to arrive on time and save David from Dr. Henry. At the hospital, Mackenzie told David that Dr. Henry had confessed that he was the one who had murdered Alan, Sally, and Linda. Dr. Henry also said that Dan helped him to take care of their dead bodies. In the night, David was trying to sleep, but he was unable to do it. He couldn't stop thinking about the day when his wife and daughter died. He then called Mackenzie and asked him to give him another case to investigate so that he could distract his mind from his past. The next day, Mackenzie came to see David and asked him to investigate a case about a dead body that they found in Runa Island in Glasgow. David agreed to investigate that case and visited that island right away. When he arrived in that island, he met a former detective named Brody. Brody was the person who discovered the dead body in that island and reported it to the police. David and Brody then went to a small house in that island. They were accompanied by 2 police officers named Josie and Duncan. When they arrived in that place, they saw Brody's van being parked outside. Brody left his van there after he found the dead body in that house. He hadn't had any chance to take it back because he needed to wait for the police to arrive. Now that the police officers had arrived, Brody went inside his van and left that place. David, Josie, and Duncan then went inside the small house and checked the dead body that was found by Brody there. They found out that that corpse had been burned to ashes. It appeared that that corpse was burned in high temperature of fire. So, they found it strange that it was only that corpse that was burned by the fire, meanwhile the house was still in a good condition. David observed that corpse's skull and found out that the corpse was a woman, but he still had no idea how that corpse was burned to death. As the day turned into nightfall, David, Josie, and Duncan decided to stop their investigation and went to the nearby hotel. When they arrived there, the owner of that hotel, Ellen, greeted them. David saw Ellen's daughter, a young girl named Anna, in that place. Anna reminded him of his late daughter. David then asked Ellen to allow him to lend her car because there wasn't any taxi in that island. Ellen agreed to allow him to use her car. The next day, David, Josie, and Duncan returned to the small house that they visited another day and continued their investigation about the burned corpse. While they were examining that corpse, they found an earring that wasn't burned and kept it as the evidence. Not long after that, Brody came to that place because he wanted to see the police investigating the burned corpse. But Josie asked him to leave because only the authority that was allowed to enter the crime scene. After David examined that burned corpse, he concluded that that corpse had been there for around 4 or 5 weeks. Suddenly, he noticed that there were drops of liquid among those ashes. He looked at the ceiling and found out that there was something odd there. He assumed that that liquid was human fat. David said that there were 2 methods to burn a human until they turned into ashes. The first method was they burned them in high temperature of fire, and the second method was they burned them in smaller temperature of fire, but in very long duration. David argued that it was unlikely that the burned corpse in front of them was burned by using the first method because the house was still in a good condition. So he'd assumed that the corpse was burned by using the second method. He also found out that there was a wound in that woman's head. He concluded that that woman had been murdered. When Josie called her team in the police and asked them to send help, a journalist named Maggie suddenly came to that place. Maggie took a picture of that place, and Josie told her to leave right away. As the day turned into the nightfall, David and Josie returned to the hotel. Meanwhile, Duncan stayed in that place. On his way home, David suddenly had a hallucination where he saw the ghost of his late daughter. He was shocked because of that he had a car accident. The next day, David woke up and found himself at a house that was owned by a married couple, Michael and Grace. Michael and Grace were the ones who had saved him in the car accident that he had another day. Fortunately, David didn't suffer from any serious injury because of that accident. Meanwhile, a man visited a lake and checked a container there. There were 6 people inside that container. That man came to that place to give some food to those people. When David returned to the hotel, he called the police and asked them to send a team to the crime scene. The police told him that they would come to that place the next morning because there would be a storm that night. Not long after that, Brody visited that hotel. He showed David a newspaper that contained an article about the burned corpse that David was investigating. That article was written by Maggie the journalist. David said that he didn't care about that article. Later, while David was leaving the hotel, Maggie suddenly approached him. Maggie told him that she knew that he spent a night at Michael and Grace's house. She said that Michael was a mysterious man because she couldn't find any information about his past. She suspected that Michael was using a fake identity. At home, Grace was trying to talk to Michael, but Michael stayed away from her. It appeared that they were having a fight. David and Josie returned to the crime scene because the storm was coming. They were afraid if the storm damaged the crime scene, so they came to that place to protect the crime scene from the storm. In another place, a group of fishermen were hanging out in a place. That group of fishermen was led by a man named Ian. They were worried with the presence of the police in that island. Ian then told a man named Gunther to return to the container by the lake and give some food to people inside that container. Michael went to the hotel to see his mistress, a woman named Ellen. They made out for a while before Ellen left that place. Ellen went to a clinic that was owned by Michael's wife, Grace. Grace was working as a nurse there. Ellen came to that clinic because she was not feeling well. After Grace examined her, she asked her to take a pregnancy test. Ellen then took the pregnancy test, like how Grace suggested her, and found out that she was pregnant. David visited Brody at his house. He came to that place to ask for Brody's opinion about the case that he was investigating, since Brody was a former detective. He said that he had examined the burned corpse and found out that that corpse was a woman at the age of 25 to 30 years old with the height around 175 centimeters. He also concluded that that woman died 4 weeks ago. He went through the missing persons database and found 3 missing women who matched that corpse's criteria. But those 3 women weren't from that island. Brody suggested David to interrogate Ian, the owner of the ferry that carried passengers to that island. Suddenly, David received a call from Duncan. Duncan informed David that the house where they found the burned corpse was in a bad condition because of the huge storm. After David heard that, he and Josie rushed to that house to save the evidence from the huge storm. That house began to collapse, but David and his team finally managed to get out of that place safely and save the evidence. In another place, Ian tried to contact someone by using his radio. But because of the huge storm, he wasn't able to make a contact because there wasn't any signal there. Gunther was worried with the people in the container. He was afraid if those people caught a cold because of the huge storm. But he and his friends couldn't do anything to help them because David was still in that island. David and his team went to Grace's clinic and asked Grace to help them to keep the evidence from the crime scene. Grace gladly allowed them to do that. When Grace returned home, she saw Maggie waiting for her there. Maggie came to that place to ask Grace to allow her to write an article about her clinic. At the clinic, Ian was investigating the skull of the burned corpse. After he investigated that skull, he assumed that that skull belonged to a woman named Kelly. Duncan saw Kelly's picture and thought that he had seen that woman before, but he couldn't remember where. In the evening, David was still busy investigating Kelly's skull by himself. Suddenly, he heard a noise from another room. He got out of the room and checked the situation in that clinic, but he didn't see anyone there. He only found some footages in that place. In Grace's house, Grace and Maggie were having a conversation. Suddenly, Maggie told Grace that she needed to use the bathroom, but turned out she lied to her. She searched Grace's house instead and found an identity card there. Later, Michael and Grace were spending some time together at home. Grace told Michael that Maggie planned to write an article about her clinic. She also told him that Ellen was pregnant and cried because of that. Michael was surprised when he heard that and tried to calm her down. It seemed that Grace knew about Ellen and Michael's affair. Meanwhile, David and Josie were hanging out at the pub. Ian and Gunther, who were also in that place, approached them and asked them about what was actually going on in that island. Ian and Josie got into an argument, but they finally managed to calm down. Michael went to see Ellen secretly. Ellen told him that she was pregnant with his baby, and she decided to keep it. Michael was glad when he heard that, and said that he would be there for her. Since Ellen was Grace's friend, Michael asked her to leave the town with him and start a new life in a new place together. In the night, the huge storm was coming. David tried to sleep, but he failed to do that. So he decided to return to the clinic and investigate the burned corpse. While he was investigating that corpse, he suddenly fell asleep. But not long after that, he woke up from his sleep and found out that that place was catching fire. Duncan stayed inside the van that was parked outside the house where Kelly's corpse was found. Suddenly, he heard someone approaching his van. He got out of the van and checked the situation outside, but he didn't find anyone there. David was struggling to get out of the clinic that caught fire because he got locked inside. Fortunately, Ian came to that place and managed to save him. The villagers also came to that place and helped the police to extinguish the fire. David told Josie that someone was trying to destroy the evidence. He believed that the person who murdered Kelly was still in that island. Josie was worried about Duncan when she heard that. She then rushed to Duncan's place to check on him. But unfortunately, it was already too late. When Josie arrived there, she was shocked to see Duncan lying dead in his van. It appeared that someone had burned him down to death. Later, the villagers gathered at the pub. Ian asked Gunther to relocate people inside the container while he would distract the attention of the villagers and keep them in that place. In the van, David examined Duncan's dead body and found a wound in Duncan's head. He concluded that the murderer attacked Duncan first, before he killed him by burning him down. While Brody was searching that area, he found a jerrycan cap and told David about it. David smelled that jerrycan cap and sensed the trace of gasoline there. Gunther went to the container by the lake and found out that the people who lived there were in a bad condition. He asked them to leave that place with him. After David, Josie, and Brody examined Duncan's body, they returned to the pub. Josie asked Ian to lend her his radio because she needed to contact her team and the police. Josie asked her about where she was when the villagers were busy extinguishing the fire at the clinic another night. Josie told him that she needed to call the police soon because someone had murdered her coworker Duncan. Ian was surprised when he heard that. He finally allowed Josie to use his radio. At the same time, Ian's son, Kevin, came to see Gunther and told him to relocate the people from the container because Josie was heading to that place. Not long after that, David and Josie arrived in that place. Ian tried to contact the lifeguard at the beach by using his radio, but there was no any answer. Brody noticed that there was a jerrycan that didn't have a cap in that place. He asked Ian and his group if they knew a woman named Kelly. David also showed Kelly's picture to them. Ian admitted that he once saw that woman using his ferry, but that was all that he knew about her. After that, David, Josie, and Brody left that place. But while David was walking away from that place, he heard someone coughing in the boat. In the evening, Michael went to see David and asked him to help him to find Grace, who had been missing. David and Michael then went to Michael's house. When they arrived there, David saw a mess in that place. There were broken glass and bloodstain on the floor. David asked Michael to stay in that place and wait for him there while he would look for Grace. After a while, David finally managed to find Grace at the harbor. Grace told him that she was sad and disappointed because she knew about Michael and Ellen's affair, especially after she found out that Ellen was pregnant with Michael's baby. David comforted her by saying that he knew how she was feeling because he lost his wife and daughter at the same time. Grace finally changed her mind and canceled her plan to commit suicide. Apparently, the people in the container had been relocated to the boat in Ian and his group's headquarters. Kevin went inside that boat and gave some food to those people. He found out that one of those people was sick. After that, he came to see his father and told him about the person who was sick. But Ian said that they couldn't do anything to help him except waiting for the storm to go. They could only take that person to the mainland once the storm was gone. At home, Michael received a sudden visit from Maggie. Maggie told him that she wanted to write an article about Grace's clinic. Michael said that he wasn't interested in getting featured in any article. Suddenly, Maggie told him about a missing case of a woman named Shobin. Michael looked surprised when she heard that. David and Grace finally returned to that place. David said that he would go with Maggie. In the car, Maggie told David that Shobin was Michael's ex-girlfriend who had been reported missing. She thought that Michael had something to do with her missing case. Josie and Brody went to Ian's headquarters and interrogated Ian. Brody told Ian that he wanted to borrow a jerrycan. Meanwhile, David was checking the boat outside where he heard someone coughing before. But when he went inside that boat, he didn't find anyone there. Turned out, Kevin and Mary, Josie's daughter, had relocated those people to another place. Meanwhile, Maggie was waiting for someone in his car that she parked outside the house on the hill where Kelly's corpse was found. Suddenly, she heard someone approaching her car. At the same time, David saw a flame from afar. It seemed that that flame was from the hill. Turned out, that flame was from Maggie's car. Maggie was trapped inside her car with her hands being tied to the car. Not long after that, David, Josie, and Brody arrived in that place. They were shocked to see what happened there. Turned out, Maggie was still alive. She cried and asked them to help her. But unfortunately, David and his team failed to save her. That car suddenly exploded and Maggie died instantly in that explosion. In another place, a man was searching a ship. He suspected that the illegal immigrants were hiding in that ship, but he didn't find anyone there. Kevin didn't tell him that he had relocated those illegal immigrants to another place. Ian then told his men to find those immigrants soon. David was investigating the van that was parked outside the house on the hill to find out if Duncan and Maggie were murdered by the same person. While he was investigating that van, he found the earring that looked like the earring that he found in Kelly's ashes. At the pub, Ian gathered the villagers. He suggested them to stay in their own house and let him and his team find those illegal immigrants. Then, while Gunther was searching the area to find those illegal immigrants, he saw Mary heading to some place and carrying some food with her. David and Josie went to the pub. Josie panicked when she found out that her daughter Mary didn't come to work that day. Gunther followed Mary secretly and found out that Kevin had been helping those illegal immigrants to hide in that place. Mary left that place and saw Josie outside. She took her mother to the house where those illegal immigrants stayed and asked her to break up the fight between Kevin and Gunther. Michael went to Ellen's house to check on Ellen. He said that he was worried about her. Grace followed him secretly and saw him and Ellen hugging each other. Josie interrogated Kevin, and Kevin admitted that he and his father had been helping those illegal immigrants to live in that island. Kevin also revealed that Kelly got involved in this case. He said that Kelly helped them to carry fake identity cards for those illegal immigrants, but he said that he had no idea about the person who had murdered Kelly. Brody returned to the hill and saw car tire tracks there. It seemed that those car tire tracks were new. He took a picture of those car tire tracks and showed it to David. He explained that those tracks were from an SUV, and the only person who rode an SUV in that island was Michael. David and Brody then went to Michael's house and saw a mess in that place. They were surprised when they saw Grace lying unconscious on the floor with injuries all over her body. Fortunately, Grace was still alive. She woke up from her faint and told David that Michael had attacked her. Kevin came to see his father and found out that his father was busy packing his bags and preparing himself to run away from the island. Ian asked him to run away with him, but Kevin refused to do that. David took Grace to the hotel to protect her from Michael. After that, he went looking for Michael and finally managed to find him on the hill. He saw Michael sitting alone in that place. He told Michael that he came to that place to arrest him. David, Brody, and Josie then took Michael to his house. When they arrived there, Michael was confused and surprised to see the mess in that place. David said that Grace told him that Michael had attacked her, but Michael denied that. David also told him that Grace was at the hotel right now. Michael panicked when he heard that and said that he needed to go to the hotel soon to save Ellen. He said that Grace was the person who had murdered his ex-girlfriend. After David, Brody, and Josie heard that, they rushed to the pub. When they arrived there, they saw Grace holding Ellen's daughter hostage. Grace threatened Michael that she would kill Ellen's daughter. At the same time, there was a gas leak in that place. David told Grace that she could kill him instead of that young girl if she wanted to die together with someone. While Grace was about to stab Ellen's daughter, Ellen quickly grabbed her daughter and managed to save her. But unfortunately, Michael got stabbed by Grace. Michael suffered from serious injury because of that. He told David and Josie to leave that place soon. He planned to take his own life by blowing up that place. He also explained that Grace was actually his own sister. David and Josie then got out of that place. Turned out Josie had taken care of the gas leak in the kitchen so that Michael couldn't blow up that place. She then returned to the kitchen to find Grace, but she didn't see her anywhere. She only saw Michael lying dead on the floor. Not long after that, the storm was finally gone, and the team that the police sent finally arrived in that island. Suddenly, David received a voice message from Duncan. In that voice message, Duncan told him that he knew Kelly because he and Kelly used to attend the same school. He revealed that Kelly's real name was Becky. After that, David talked to Brody. David told Brody that Grace was the person who had killed Maggie, but he still didn't know about Grace's motives for murdering Duncan and Maggie. Brody revealed that Becky was his daughter and she was a drug addict. He said that one day he decided to do something because he was sick of his daughter who kept causing problems. He wanted to teach her a lesson, but he ended up killing her instead. He also confessed that he was the one who killed Duncan because he knew that Duncan could solve this problem. After telling everything to David, Brody finally decided to take his own life by jumping off the cliff. David was shocked when he saw that. Time finally went by. David and Jenny had started a new life together. It seemed that David was happy with his new life. Suddenly, someone knocked on his door. David opened the door and saw Grace standing there. Grace stabbed him in the stomach and David collapsed.